In every crime, there's a reflection. A motive hidden in plain sight. A truth distorted by silence. Welcome to the Forensic Mirror, where psychology meets evidence, and every case reveals more than just what happened, it reveals why. Welcome back, truth seekers. You're now tuned into the Forensic Mirror, where shadows speak and silence is never innocent. Each week, we peel back the layers of guilt, decode the psychological fingerprints, and stare straight into the eyes of calculated chaos. This isn't just true crime. It's truth, dissected. Madness, mapped. And justice, relentlessly pursued. Please don't forget to follow, so you will know when I drop another crime episode. Also, head over to Conversations with Impact, which is another Spotify podcast of mine, where I talk about any and everything. Thanks to all. Episode 7, The Deep Dive into Dardeen Family Massacre. Welcome back to the Forensic Mirror. Today I will be exploring the infamous Dardeen Family Massacre of 1987 in Ena, Illinois. We'll cover the facts of the case, the chilling crime scene, the investigation's twists, major suspects including serial killer confessions, and the lingering impact on the local community, highlighting the enduring mystery and ongoing hope for justice. Stay tuned while we get started.
In 1987, Ena, Illinois, was barely a town, just a tiny community of around 460 people. It was the definition of a place where people assumed their doors were safe, where deep, dark crimes felt like something that only happened far away. This small spot on the map was home to the Dardeen family. The parents were Russell Keith Dardeen, 29, and Ruby Elaine Dardeen, 30 years old. Like many couples, they chose to go by their middle names, Keith and Elaine. They were raising their 3-year-old son, Peter. They were a young family building a life, looking forward to the future. Elaine was 7 months pregnant with their second child, a baby girl they planned to name Casey, or Ian if it was a boy. They were so excited that they were preparing to pack up their mobile home and move back to their hometown of Mount Carmel to start fresh. But tragically, they would never get that chance. For all its quiet appearances, southern Illinois was not truly safe. The rural region had been gripped by a chilling wave of violence. In the 2 years leading up to the Dardeen murders, it was more than 10 people that had been already killed locally. This pervasive darkness had a clear and profound effect on Keith Dardeen. Friends confirmed that Keith was struggling with intense anxiety about the crime creeping closer to his family. After a 10-year-old girl was raped and murdered in the area earlier that year in May of 1987, Keith became obsessed with keeping his family secure. His paranoia grew so severe that one night, when a young woman stopped by his mobile home just asking to make a simple phone call, Keith refused to open his door to her. He was not a man who willingly let strangers into his family's space. Keith's growing terror reached such a peak that he began making urgent preparations to flee Ena, intending to move his wife and children without even having a new job secured first. He either feared the general violence around them, or, as some later theorized, he was worried about a specific, targeted threat. This hypervigilance from Keith, his extreme caution and refusal to admit a young woman seeking help, is vital to understanding this case. The later discovery that there was no sign of forced entry suggests an extreme paradox. Either the killer was someone Keith knew and trusted enough to let in, or the killer somehow exploited a very brief moment of vulnerability to overcome Keith's strict rules about security. This contradiction strongly suggests that the murderer was not a random individual, but someone either known or someone who understood Keith's habits well enough to circumvent them immediately. This fact alone should have directed the initial search heavily toward the Dardeens' local circle, regardless of how innocent they appeared. The horror began to surface on Wednesday, November 18, 1987. Keith, who worked at a local water plant, failed to show up for his 7 a.m. shift. For a man known for his dedication and rising anxiety about family safety, his absence was immediately alarming. This had Keith's supervisor worried. So his supervisor drove to the mobile home and knocked, but no one answered. The supervisor then contacted Keith's parents, Russell, and Joanne Dardeen, who confirmed they had not heard from the family either. They agreed the situation was too unusual and requested the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office perform a welfare check. Later that morning, an officer arrived at the secluded mobile home. After knocking on the front door with no response, the officer checked the back and found the door unlocked. What greeted the officer inside was described as a scene of absolute, sickening brutality. Detectives who worked on the case then and who remember it now, even after 38 years later, still described the scene as the most horrific thing they had ever witnessed. In the main bedroom, law enforcement found blood everywhere. 3 bodies were discovered in the waterbed: Elaine and her son Peter, who had been beaten to death. The murder weapon, which was quickly identified, a baseball bat that belonged to the Dardeen family. Elaine, 7 months pregnant, had been beaten so violently, in what police described as a prolonged attack, that the trauma forced her into premature labor. She delivered her daughter right there in their mobile home. The killer, or killers, then carried out an act of extraordinary barbarity. They murdered the newborn baby girl by beating her to death as well. They wanted to erase the family completely. This level of overkill suggested the goal was not simple death or silencing a witness, but total annihilation. Immediately after this explosive violence, the killer did something incredibly chilling. The killer or killers had neatly wrapped Elaine, Peter, and the new baby girl in the bedding and tucked them into their waterbed. This sudden shift from disorganized, uncontrollable rage to methodical, compulsive order suggests a deeply conflicted psychological profile. The killer was capable of frenzied overkill driven by rage, but also possessed a sudden, cold need for a strange, post-mortem ritual, a psychological duality often seen in the most disturbing and complex homicides. Missing from the scene, and initially suspected of the crime, were Keith and his car. So, this is how the initial focus shattered. So, when the 3 bodies were discovered, and Keith and his car were nowhere to be found, investigators first believed the case was solved. Keith, who was likely the killer, had fled the area. This initial focus was shattered the very next day, on November 19th.
Before we continue, please don't forget to follow and share. And thank you all for listening. Now, let's get back to the case.
So, on the 19th of November, Keith's body was discovered in a field about a mile away from the mobile home. Forensic examination quickly determined that the bodies were linked. Keith was killed within an hour of his wife and children. The killer concluded the crime with an act of staggering audacity. Keith's car was soon located, not abandoned far away, but parked in Benton, extremely close to the local police station. Placing the vehicle near the seat of law enforcement was not an attempt to hide evidence. It was a deliberate, psychological taunt. This suggests that the killer was confident, arrogant, and enjoyed mocking the very authorities tasked with finding them. This calculated control, the daring placement of the car, stands in sharp contrast to the frenzy of the beating inside the mobile home, reiterating the dual nature of the killer's personality. Capable of extreme, disorganized rage, yet also possessing chilling, organized control. This pattern is often a trademark of a thrill killer, who enjoys the cat-and-mouse game. The discovery of Keith's body turned the investigation into a massive endeavor. 30 detectives worked the case full-time, chasing down over 1,000 leads and documenting nearly 150 items of evidence. Despite this immense effort, they came up empty. Investigators systematically ruled out all the common motives they searched for at the crime scene. So, they ruled out robbery, since valuables were left behind in the mobile home. They also ruled out relationship issues. The police determined the Dardeens led clean lives. There was no sign of infidelity, drug dealing, gambling debt, or other illicit behavior. Forced entry was also ruled out, confirming the Dardeens likely knew or trusted whoever they let inside. Cult activity was ruled out also, because of the rumors that Satanists were responsible, but this allegation was quickly dismissed. When a crime involves extreme levels of rage and overkill but completely lacks any traditional, traceable motive, like money, relationship conflict, or drugs, it signifies that the motive was entirely internal to the killer, a sudden pathology or transient grievance. Because the motive could not be traced back to the victim's known behavior or associations, the case became structurally unsolvable through conventional investigative methods that rely on motive and association. They came up with a few competing theories. With all conventional motives eliminated, detectives were left with only unsettling thoughts. The first theory was, maybe it was mistaken identity. Due to the brutality, it seemed so disconnected from the Dardeens' clean lives. Police considered the possibility that the killer had intended to target someone else but mistakenly hit the Dardeen mobile home. Another theory was, maybe it was a personal grudge. Keith's mother, Joanne Dardeen, believed the killer held a deep personal grudge that investigators never uncovered. She publicly speculated years later that someone may have wanted Keith to sell drugs and he refused, or that someone might have made advances toward Elaine that she rejected, causing the killer to unleash his rage on the entire family. These theories attempted to explain the extreme, personalized nature of the rage, the mutilation of Keith, the overkill of the family, through a specific, but hidden, past encounter. The case languished as a perplexing cold case for years until the 2000s, when a potential suspect emerged from an unlikely place: death row. Serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, who had been convicted and sentenced to death for murdering a teenage girl in Texas, began claiming responsibility for the Dardeen murders. There were compelling similarities between Sells' known methods and the Dardeen crime scene. Sells was a transient killer who used a variety of weapons, including guns, knives, and bats. Crucially, Sells had previously killed a mother and her son in 1985, beating them to death using the son's own baseball bat. The fact that the Dardeens were killed with their own bat gave a strong credence to Sells' confession. But there were some red flags to Sells' confession. Despite the suggestive overlaps, authorities quickly developed significant doubts about Sells' claims. Investigators knew Sells had an extensive history of false confessions. Furthermore, while his account matched the major details that had been released publicly, it contained inaccuracies concerning specific details that had been deliberately kept secret by the police. Sells also changed his account 3 different times regarding how he originally met the Dardeen family. Adding further suspicion, Sells claimed that the murders began after Keith Dardeen made a homosexual advance toward him. Detectives and the family found this claim highly improbable, as there was no evidence from the initial investigation to suggest Keith had any interest in his own sex. Investigators believed Sells invented this detail, as he often did in other confessions, to make it appear that his victims had provoked his monstrous savagery, thereby justifying his actions. The psychological need Sells had to invent provocation ties directly back to the extreme, personalized mutilation of Keith's body, indicating that even if Sells wasn't the killer, the true offender shared the psychological pattern of externalizing blame for their rage. To resolve the inconsistencies and determine definitively if Sells was the killer, Southern Illinois detectives urgently requested permission to transfer him back to Illinois to walk through the crime scene with them. However, Texas state law forbids death row prisoners from leaving the state. This jurisdictional failure meant that the closest thing the case had to a resolution, a serial killer taking credit, could never be definitively confirmed or denied through proper verification. Sells was never charged with the Dardeen family homicides. This institutional failure left the case hanging in a state of legal and psychological limbo. Authorities also briefly considered the railroad killer, Angel Macherino Resendiz, who was known to travel via freight trains and use beating as a method. However, investigators were never able to connect Resendiz to the Ena area. This unsolved murder case had left the enduring scar on the community. The savage and seemingly random nature of the Dardeen family murders terrified the residents of Jefferson and Franklin counties. Because there was no motive found and no clear identity for the killer, the community felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. People had no way to gauge who was safe and who was dangerous. In the aftermath, many residents armed themselves for protection, and numerous people suffered adverse psychological effects from the profound fear that gripped the region. The construction of the Big Muddy River Correctional Center near the area in the years since has further changed the landscape, but the psychological scar left by the horror in Ina remains.
And so, as we close episode 7, the unanswered questions are profound. Why haven't they found this killer? Was this the work of the specific local threat that Keith Dardeen feared so intensely, someone he had to have known or trusted? Or was it truly Tommy Lynn Sells who later confessed, though shaky, provided the most consistent psychological fit for the unique blend of rage and control found at the scene before his execution? The Dardeen family murders. The savage beating of a pregnant mother and her son, the murder of a newborn baby, and the shooting and mutilation of the father remain officially unsolved nearly 4 decades later. Investigators meticulously documented nearly 150 items of evidence. Crucially, DNA samples were collected from the victims and remain preserved. Since no suspect profile was ever definitively matched to the crime scene, the case now hinges on modern forensic technology. The existence of these DNA samples means that the case is not truly closed. New advancements in genetic testing offer the chance to definitively prove whether a known killer like Tommy Lynn Sells was involved, or whether an entirely new profile can be identified. For the family and the community, the hope for justice rests on a definitive new lead or a DNA match, urging anyone with information to contact the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Stay tuned and please join us for the next episode, where we will continue to examine crime stories from around the world. Thank you for listening. We encourage you to follow the Forensic Mirror podcast and share it with your colleagues, acquaintances, friends, and/or family. Thanks.